Is free will an illusion? Is the question absurd? I can do anything I like. Some philosophers and scientists beg to differ. They claim that every event is determined by prior events, including every event in our brains, which means every thought in our minds. I recall how philosopher Daniel Dennett put it to me.
People want to know about free will. They want to protect free will, and so they should. It's very important. If the world is undetermined, it's just as hard to see how you could have free will that mattered, because you want to determine what you do. It's really interesting that we use this word determined, and mainly it's a term of praise. We say, she's so determined, and so we should. We want to determine our actions, but we don't want us to be determined in the determining of our actions. Now, I think that...
Right, Dan. I do not want to be determined. I want to determine my own thoughts and actions. I want to be able to do otherwise than that which I do. But if I cannot do otherwise, then would free will be an illusion? Would there be consequences?
I think that's right. I think we have to recognize that, sure, there are varieties of free will, the traditional varieties, which who cares whether we've got them? The varieties of free will worth wanting are perfectly compatible with determinism. Now, do we have to give up something? Yeah, we have to give up something, and good riddance to it, about blame and responsibility.
Blame and responsibility, too. Much is at stake if free will is an illusion. I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth asks the big questions of free will. Here's the deep problem. On the one hand, we feel fully able to make choices without constraint. On the other hand, we are embodied beings, subject to the unbreakable chain of causes of the physical world. Free will an illusion? Philosophers and scientists offer their own lines of arguments. Both rely on definitions of determinism and free will. For orientation and clarity, I begin with philosopher Alfred Mele, leader of the Big Questions in Free Will project, which brings together philosophers, scientists, and theologians to address this perennial conundrum. Al, what is it about free will? Why do some philosophers think it's an illusion?
We have to start with this notion of determinism. And determinism is the idea that a complete description of the condition of the universe at any point in time, together with a complete list of all the laws of nature, would entail all other truths about the universe, including all truths about everything you'll ever do. Okay, that's determinism. So now we have a premise. Either the universe is deterministic or it isn't. Now suppose it is. Then some philosophers say, well, you can't have free will in that case because you could never have done otherwise than you did. All right, so that's one horn here, that determinism is true. The other horn is, well, suppose determinism isn't true. Then what do you have now? Well, they say randomness at the point of decision. So now you could decide this, you could decide that, but which one you decide is a matter of chance or luck.
And so that's not free will either.
That's what they say. Either way, then, there's no free will. But still, people feel as though they're free, and so the claim is, well, that feeling is an illusion. Now, the way most people who don't buy the argument attack it is they attack one horn or the other. So there are philosophers called compatibilists. And compatibilists say that even if determinism is true, people can act freely. What compatibilists think is that what you need is to be responsive to reasons in a certain way, so that if the reasons had been different, you would or might have acted differently.
Even though there was no possibility that the reasons were different based on the universe that we live in.
That's right. So that's one way to go. The other way to go is to say, no, you're right, free will does require that determinism be false, but the falsity of determinism doesn't just put you at the mercy of chance or randomness or luck. You're still enough in control of what you do to act freely. That kind of response is called a libertarian response. So the pro-free will views then divide into those two camps.
Attack one or the other of these problems.
That's right. One kind are called compatibilists, the other kind libertarians.
Here's the argument that free will is an illusion. If determinism is true, then every event is fixed by a previous event, and there is no room for free will. And if determinism is false, then randomness rules, and we do not have sufficient control of our actions. But because we think we do have free will must be an illusion. There are philosophical counterarguments. I should explore them. But first, I go to the science, the brain science. Because if free will is composed of thoughts, feelings, and actions, the brain is where they reside. In fact, the vanguard of those who claim free will to be an illusion are now found in neuroscience. I hear that electrical patterns in the brain provide hard evidence that free will is an illusion. I go to University College London to meet a pioneer of free will brain research, neuroscientist Patrick Haggard. Patrick, was free will an illusion? What does the brain tell us?
I think in some strong sense, free will is an illusion. So the idea of free will that we may have in our everyday lives really has severe problems when you test it against the data from modern brain science. The way most of us go through our everyday lives is with an idea of free will, which is my conscious thoughts and my conscious intentions cause my actions. I think about lifting my arm, that's a conscious mental event, and somehow that conscious mental event causes my arm to go up. Now, the causal bit is the problem, because in neuroscience, we have a real problem with the idea that a conscious event, which is somehow independent of the brain, which is occurring only in the mind but not in the brain, can somehow trigger the brain activity, which then triggers the movement of my arm. And conscious causation from the mind to the brain is really undefined, and if you like, it's a ghost in the machine. Nobody can give a good description of it. It seems almost mystical. From the neuroscientific point of view, there is no conscious mind independent of the brain. And I think this was really shown very clearly in the famous Libet experiment. So in the Libet experiment, the participant is given this rather strange instruction to make an action whenever you feel like it. A simple brisk movement of the wrist. Now, while this is happening, the participant is watching a clock hand rotating, and the participant's task is to report the moment when they feel the conscious intention to make the action, which they then subsequently make. So using this method, Libet was able to time the conscious experience of will, of free will. And while he was doing that, he was also recording the brain activity of the participants using electrodes placed on the scalp. And the really interesting part of the Libet experiment is that you can record a so-called readiness potential, a build-up of brain activity over the planning centers of the brain, often a second or so before the person makes this movement that they decide to make.
A second is a long time in brain time.
In brain time, it's extremely long, right? The brain can do a lot in a second. But the conscious experience that the person reports using the rotating clock, that happens on average only a couple of 100 milliseconds before the hand actually moves. So there's a really big gap, which is about 800 milliseconds or more between the brain beginning to prepare the action and you having the conscious experience that you're going to act. Now, if you think about it, that's exactly the opposite temporal order from what the Cartesian account of free will would require.
Right.
So the way that we think about free will in our everyday lives, and which Descartes summarized for us, is that our conscious thoughts cause our actions, but really this is not neuroscientifically possible. So no neuroscientists are really surprised by the result of the Libet experiment, because consciousness has got to be a product of our brain activity. So it's the activity of neurons.
Brain activity comes before, precedes conscious awareness. I cannot deny it. I think I make the decisions, but my brain knows before I know. What then conscious awareness? What then me? Brain science seems to turn free will upside down, because if brain activity comes before conscious intent, brain activity seems to cause conscious intent, not the other way around. Is brain science the death knell of free will? Many oppose this, disconcerting conclusion, including many philosophers. Is there other evidence? Thalia Wheatley, an experimental psychologist at Dartmouth, claims her research confirms that free will is an illusion. I meet Thalia at the first gathering of the Big Questions in Free Will project at Florida State University in Tallahassee.
Thalia, you believe free will, in common definition, is an illusion.
Yes.
And I want to know why.
Okay, and that's the key, the common definition of free will, which I believe to be my conscious self is freely deciding, initiating courses of action. There's no scientific evidence that that's the case. In fact, it lines up on the other side. It seems like consciousness is coming very late in the stream of things to be causal in the way we think of a conscious self causing action. We, of course, only see, I had the thought to pick up the coffee cup, and I picked it up, and then we chunk that as the beginning and the end, and we miss all of this neural activity that's actually creating the action before we're even aware of it. But I will say that most people who fight for free will, including neuroscientists, the best evidence that they sort of marshal is how compelling it feels to be a conscious agent. But lots of things feel compelling that we now know scientifically aren't true. There's lots of visual illusions, for example. And you know it's an illusion, but it's still compelling. Compelling is not enough. Another source of evidence we have for why we may not have this kind of free will is that the feeling of free will can be pushed around so much. You can make people feel will for things they didn't do. You can take it away when they really should have it. And so if you can push it around, this feeling, then what's it really doing? One way we push this feeling around, when I was a graduate student working with Dan Wegner at the University of Virginia, is we created a situation in which a person would be told, your job is to move this big computer mouse around with this other person. This other person they thought was another subject. Actually, it's not. It's an employee of the experiment. So they're moving the computer mouse around, and this is moving actually a cursor around on a screen. And on the screen is a bunch of different objects. And so they move the thing around, and they stop, and they rate. We gave them headphones, and they're listening to these words through their headphones, and they hear a word, like monkey, in their headphones. And this is the moment when the employee of the experiment is told through their headphones, stop on the monkey on the screen. So you get the experience as a subject hearing monkey, and then you see yourself stop on the monkey on the screen. That was completely forced by the other person, but you hear the thought, you see yourself to act, and lo and behold, you say, I did that.
So therefore, you created a situation
That's
where
right.
the person imagined they had total free will, and in fact, they had zero.
They had zero free will, but we manipulated these things, and boom, the brain coded that as I did it.
Hence, free will is an illusion.
Yes, it may be, at least a confabulation.
Ah, Thalia, confabulation. Is our sense of free will fabricating an imaginary experience? I find myself dismissing the claim that free will is an illusion. But when I cannot rebut the science, I pause. Yet free will feels so natural, nothing seems surer. I put the problem to Timothy O'Connor, a philosopher of metaphysics and religion. Tim is an expert on persons. Can persons resolve paradoxes of free will?
Tim, if you really want to understand what the human mind is about, what consciousness is, how do you reconcile free will?
So we are capable of making choices, and we hold one another responsible for our choices. That's one picture. Another picture is human beings are physically embodied things, and in highly complicated ways, physical processes unfold with regularity through time, including processes coursing through our brains. And it seems like there's an unbroken chain of causes and effects, that we are just embedded in a much larger physical machine that unfolds in this way. A fundamental distinction one needs to draw to begin to see the possibility of reconciling these two visions is between some things having causes and some things being wholly determined by some set of causal factors. There are physically embedded factors influencing me to take seriously certain options when I make a choice versus other options that I don't even consider. Often when I'm acting, if I'm biking into campus, I'm thinking about things, I'm on autopilot, but sometimes a decision is called for and options present themselves to me, and it doesn't seem that there is a physical process that is pushing me in one way rather than another. It comes to my conscious awareness, I have to decide. Now that could be an illusion, right? But there's no necessity to suppose that it's an illusion just from the fact that any choice capacity that I have is at least a causal product of that very capacity, there being a properly functioning brain. I think people move too quickly from physically embodied to it's nothing but underlying physical stuff happening here. So you have a duality of features and, in this case, of capacities to act, but there's just one underlying kind of stuff.
And out of that, you get free will.
And out of that, you get free will, if all goes well.
To Tim, there's something about persons that enables a robust free will. He claims that a choice capacity is a causal product of our conscious awareness, but that a duality of features is grounded in non-dualistic physical material. That sounds interesting, but I still cannot rid myself of the stark and simple notion that if the physical brain describes mental life completely, then our common sense understanding of free will is an illusion. Can free will be restored? Only if the science can be refuted. Does philosophy have the firepower? I go to Notre Dame to meet metaphysics philosopher Peter van Inwagen. I ask him to explain the argument that free will is an illusion.
Free will says we're able to do other things than those we do. If determinism is incompatible with free will, it implies that we're able to do just exactly those things we do. But of course, since we have a strong conviction that we could have done things, that we were able to do things other than those that we did, then free will must be an illusion. But what does it mean to be able to do something? I suggested that if determinism was true, you couldn't be able to do anything other than what you did. But certain philosophers have said that this argument is wrong because the ability to do both those things is quite compatible with determinism. Even if determinism is true, you can have a fragile window that never breaks, right? They say it's just a conceptual confusion to say that you're unable to do things except what you do if determinism is true. The same conceptual confusion it would be to say that something couldn't be fragile. Because after all, if the window never is going to break, then the present state of things and the laws of physics determine nothing is ever going to strike the window hard enough to break it, so it will never break. Still, it's sitting there being fragile all the time, isn't it? According to these philosophers, compatibilists, to say that you're able to do something is just to say that if you were to choose to do it, you would do it.
Even though there's no chance in the world that you ever would,
Yeah.
the fact that you could choose to do it or there was a choice makes free will and determinism compatible.
Right, because that's what ability is. You're able to do something if you would do it if you chose to. And that's all there is to ability. The compatibilist will tell you.
How about incompatibilist?
The incompatibilist is loyal to that argument that you can't be able to do something if doing it would require a departure from the laws of physics. The incompatibilist, therefore, says that morality and everything else free will requires must require indeterminism. It must be that if you do something and were able to do something else beforehand, it was causally undetermined which of those two things you would do.
So you really do have a real choice.
Remember that the compatibilist will say that you have a real choice as well.
Right,
Just that the compatibilist has a different understanding of what it is to have a real choice from the incompatibilist. But what the incompatibilist is saying is that there's a real physical possibility of both things happening. Free will is either incompatible with determinism or it's compatible with determinism. Suppose it's both incompatible with determinism and incompatible with indeterminism, and there are only two possibilities, determinism and indeterminism. Then it's incompatible with every possibility, so it's impossible.
To Peter, free will is either compatible with determinism, called compatibilism, or free will is incompatible with determinism, called libertarianism, and Peter can prove them both wrong, which is impossible. So does the philosophy of free will implode, defaulting to science, which declares all free will, compatibilist free will or libertarian free will, an illusion? I hurry back to Al Mele.
My own view is this. Either compatibilism is true or libertarianism is true. That either-or proposition is more credible than the opposing proposition, which is no free will either way. Free will is an illusion. The libertarian part of the project, I think, is more interesting. So you can sort of see this problem about luck or randomness. What are you going to do about that? How do you save libertarianism? The answer is decisions you made in the past have a bearing on how your life goes. You can learn from the consequences of those decisions and adjust your thinking about the future. So past decisions have effects on future decisions. They can actually shape the probabilities of future decisions. So I say that if you look at people just at moments in time, just snapshots of them internally, this luck problem looms large. But if you consider what people can do to change their luck, as it were, they start looking more like they could be free agents.
Philosophically, free will seems to contradict any description of the physical world. Scientifically, free will seems to be an artificial construct of our brain-generated inner awareness. So is free will a massive illusion? The more one studies the brain, the more one finds electrical patterns preceding conscious awareness. But if free will were an illusion, could we trust anybody about anything? I recall again Dan Dennett's wisdom.
You're looking for somebody to babysit your children.
Okay.
So you want somebody good.
Yeah.
You want somebody who will be foresighted, who will think carefully and be reflective. You want a very, very adroit and clever and responsible agent. Now I give you two choices. One of them is a human being. The other one is a robot, but a very intelligent robot. In fact, a robot that is better than the human being, determined to be better, more resourceful than the person, because the person, gets tired and a little bit absent-minded and so forth. Well, I'm also going to suppose that the person is not determined, whereas the robot is. Now, who do you trust your children to? Is it obvious?
Tricky.
Yeah, it's tricky, because you begin to realize that the competence that robot is determined to have is the competence
That's
that
what
we
I want.
care about.
Yeah, that's right.
Nice, provocative. I appreciate I can be competent even if I am determined. But free will's claim is not so much to competence, but rather to private volition, mental control, personal responsibility. It'd be a big deal if there were no free will. All these arguments.
So how do you conclude?
It's a mystery to me, but I think it would be a greater mystery if there were no free will. So I conclude, yes, there must be something wrong with one of these arguments. So I regard free will as a complete mystery.
For me, for now, either free will is an illusion or something is missing. Getting closer to truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com. This program was supported in part by a grant from the John Templeton Foundation.